Christmas morning has always carried a sacred weight for me. Even now, as the years have lined my face and slowed my steps, the season never fails to stir my soul. The smell of pine needles on the rug, the faint crackle of the fireplace, the memory of children's laughter echoing through the hall. It's a symphony I thought I'd never grow tired of. But that Christmas morning, the music felt different. I sat quietly in my armchair, the knitted blanket pulled tight around my legs. My son, Daniel, sat on the sofa, sipping coffee, eyes heavy from the late-night preparations. His wife, Angela, perched beside him, her posture rigid, her smile stiff and painted on. She'd always been that way, cold where others were warm, calculating where others were kind. I had tried, for years, to love her, to give her the benefit of the doubt. But a mother's heart feels what her son cannot see. I placed a small gift in her lap, a silk scarf, pale silver with delicate stitching. I'd chosen it carefully, even had the edges hemmed by hand. I thought, maybe, just maybe, she would appreciate the thought. She barely glanced at it before tossing it aside, as though it were nothing more than the wrapping paper it came in. My son cleared his throat, embarrassed. I smiled through it, though the knot in my chest tightened. And then I heard it, her voice. Low. Sharp. Cutting through the cheer of Christmas morning like a blade. "It's time," she whispered, though I could hear every word. "We can't keep her here anymore. She needs to be in a home. A nursing home." My son shifted in his seat, his fingers tightening around his mug. He didn't respond. He didn't defend me. That silence hurt worse than her cruelty. Angela leaned closer, her lips curling into a smirk. "You know I'm right. She's old. Weak. She'll only drag us down." I smiled. I had to. To cry would be to let them win. Instead, I folded my hands neatly in my lap and said softly, "Before I go, why don't we all sit together for a little Christmas treat? A home movie. I made something special for today." Angela's eyes flickered with suspicion. She never trusted me, though she loved to underestimate me. "A home movie?" she repeated, her tone dripping with disdain. "Yes," I said, my voice steady. "A memory. For the family." I rose slowly, walked to the television, and pressed play. The screen lit up with warmth. Daniel as a boy, tearing through wrapping paper, his laughter pure and unrestrained. My late husband carving the turkey, smiling through his glasses. Me, younger, stronger, holding the family together with steady hands. But then, something changed. The footage cut. The colors shifted. The sounds no longer belonged to Christmas mornings of the past. Instead, the screen showed nights Angela thought I was asleep. Conversations she thought no one heard. Meetings she thought were private. Angela's voice filled the room. "She's nothing. A burden. Once she's out of here, everything will be ours. The money. The house. Daniel will see I was right." My son froze, his face drained of color. The mug slipped from his hand and shattered on the floor. Angela leapt to her feet, fury flashing in her eyes. "What is this?" she screamed. I didn't answer. I just sat back down, calm, my blanket pulled tight again. The footage continued. Plans. Schemes. Lies she told my son about me. Lies she told him about money, about loyalty, about love. Then the knock. 3 sharp raps on the door. Angela's voice cracked. Who is that?" Daniel stood, trembling. He opened the door. The police stepped inside. Their eyes found me. One of them nodded. Angela's face turned pale. And I leaned back in my chair, smiling, as the empire she thought she built began to crumble before her eyes. The knock of the police that morning had been no coincidence. It wasn't luck. It wasn't fate. It was years of planning. You see, Angela thought of me as weak, helpless, a relic clinging to life, too fragile to resist her sharp tongue and sharper ambitions. She wasn't the first to mistake my silence for weakness, and I knew she wouldn't be the last. But what she didn't know was that silence had been my weapon. For years, I had watched, waited, listened. I'd endured her comments, her sneers, her muttered insults behind closed doors. I'd watched her manipulate my son, my sweet Daniel, who had grown from a bright-eyed boy into a man whose spine bent beneath the weight of her control. I wanted to scream at him, shake him awake. But experience had taught me, people do not wake until they are ready. So instead, I listened. It began with a small voice recorder, slipped beneath the sofa cushion one afternoon when Angela was gossiping on the phone. Later, it became a discreet camera tucked into the corner of the kitchen, angled just right to capture her late-night conversations. Each time I uncovered a new lie, a new betrayal, I didn't confront her. I simply tucked the evidence away, like seeds planted deep in the soil, waiting for the right season to bloom. And oh, how they bloomed. There were phone calls, Angela bragging to her friends about how easily she could twist Daniel's mind. There were secret meetings, men slipping envelopes into her purse, their faces shadowed, but their voices clear. There were words that cut me deeper than knives. She thinks this is her house.
She'll see.
Once she's gone, it's mine. And Daniel, he'll thank me for it. At night, when the house fell silent, I'd sit alone in my bedroom, headphones pressed to my ears, listening to the venom she spilled. It should have broken me. Instead, it forged me. Because the more she revealed, the more I realized I wasn't just fighting for my dignity, I was fighting for my son's soul. Still, I bided my time. I waited through birthdays where she smiled like a queen while ignoring me. Through dinners where my son's eyes dimmed a little more each day. Through holidays where I was made to feel like a guest in my own home. Until that Christmas morning. That was the day I pressed play. Angela's scream still rang in my ears as I sat quietly in my chair. My son's silence, his utter devastation, was the echo of my own heart years earlier, when I had first realized how far he had drifted from me. But now, the truth was no longer hidden. The officers who entered carried more than handcuffs. They carried the weight of every recording, every video, every document I had slipped quietly into their hands over the past year. Yes, this had been in motion long before Angela opened her mouth that morning. The home movie wasn't just a trap for her pride. It was the final act of a play I had been scripting for years. One of the officers turned to me. "Ma'am, if you'd like to step into the other room, we'll handle the rest." But I didn't move. I stayed seated, eyes locked on Angela. Because sometimes, justice isn't in the courtroom. Sometimes, justice is watching your enemy realize their empire is built on sand. Angela's face went white. She lunged forward, trying to shut off the TV, but Daniel caught her wrist. For the first time in years, I saw him stand firm. His voice shook, but there was steel in it. "What did you do, Angela?" And just like that, the silence I'd carried all these years began to shatter. The living room was silent except for the crackling of the fireplace. The officer stood firm near the doorway, Daniel frozen in place, and Angela, her face pale, lips trembling, still tried to pull her wrist free from my son's grip. But I just sat back.
Calm.
Quiet. Watching. Because I knew what was coming next. The screen flickered again, and the special home movie I'd prepared shifted to a new recording. Not from a birthday party. Not from Christmas. Not from some innocent memory. It was from 3 months earlier. The footage was grainy at first, captured from the small hidden camera I'd placed in the corner of the kitchen. Angela's voice came through sharp, laced with bitterness. "He's so pathetic. Daniel doesn't even question where the money goes. I transfer what I need, no questions asked. He thinks I'm paying bills, huh? If only he knew who really benefits." On the screen, she leaned back in her chair, twirling a glass of wine in her hand. Across from her sat a man, slick hair, expensive watch, the kind of grin that didn't belong in a family home. He slid an envelope across the table. "Keep him distracted. Keep him obedient. We'll both win," the man said. Angela's laugh filled the room. "Oh, don't worry. He's too blinded by guilt over his mother to see the truth." Daniel's eyes went wide. He staggered back, his grip loosening on her wrist. "Angela, what is this?" She shook her head violently. "No, that's not. This is fake. She edited this. It's a trick." But the tape wasn't finished. Another clip rolled. This time, Angela sat in the same kitchen, phone pressed to her ear. Her voice was softer, colder.
Don't worry, baby.
He suspects nothing. You're the only one I want. Daniel's just a means to an end. Once his mother's gone, the house is ours. Then the accounts. Then the rest. But the police officer stepped forward, voice firm. Ma'am, this evidence has been verified. Bank records confirm the transfers. Phone logs confirm the calls. And the man in that recording? He's already in custody. The color drained completely from her face. Daniel dropped his head into his hands, his shoulders shaking. Not with anger, not with rage, but with grief. The kind of grief that comes from realizing the person you loved most was your greatest enemy. I placed a hand gently on his back, but my eyes never left hers. Christmas morning was supposed to be about family, I whispered. But you forgot something, Angela. Family protects each other. And today, I protected mine. The officers stepped forward, slipping cuffs around her wrists. She thrashed, screamed, cursed my name, but it didn't matter. Her empire of lies had collapsed. And as they dragged her from the house, I finally allowed myself a smile. Because the truth had set us free, the house was silent after they took Angela away. Silent in a way that felt almost unnatural, as if the walls themselves were trying to process what they had just witnessed. Daniel sat slumped on the couch, his hands pressed over his face. I had seen him cry as a child, as a boy with scraped knees or broken toys. But this was different. His sobs were raw, jagged things, pulled from the very marrow of his soul. I didn't rush to him. I didn't smother him with comfort. Instead, I lowered myself gently onto the chair across from him, letting the quiet wrap around us both. Because sometimes, silence is the only language grief understands. Finally, his voice cracked through the stillness. Mom, how long? I swallowed hard. How long did I know? Or, how long did she betray you? He looked up, his eyes bloodshot. Both. I drew a long breath. My hands trembled, but my voice did not. I suspected for years. But the proof. I began collecting it after that night. She told you I should be sent away. That was when I knew she wouldn't stop until I was gone. Daniel winced, his jaw tightening. His silence said everything his lips could not, that he had heard those words, too, but had been too afraid to confront them. Why didn't you tell me? He whispered. Tears stung my eyes, but I held them back. Because you weren't ready to see it, Daniel. You loved her. And love blinds us, even to the sharpest knives pressed against our backs. He dropped his gaze to the floor, his chest rising and falling with uneven breaths. I wanted to reach across the space between us, to gather him up like the little boy who once climbed into my lap with his stuffed bear, but I knew I couldn't. Not yet. He wasn't a child anymore. He was a man, broken, yes, but still a man who had to face the weight of his own choices. The days that followed blurred together. Detectives came and went, asking questions, collecting evidence. I provided them with everything: hard drives, recordings, bank statements carefully tucked away in a shoebox beneath my bed. Each file, each document, was a nail in the coffin of Angela's schemes. Neighbors whispered, of course. That was the way of small communities. Rumors moved faster than the wind. Some pitted Daniel. Others, though, weren't so kind. They wondered aloud how a man could be so blind, so easily deceived. But I defended him. Always. Because I knew what it meant to be blinded by love. I had been blinded once, too, by his father. A man who had smiled sweetly at me while hiding shadows in his heart. A man I had forgiven one too many times before death had freed me from his grasp. I drew a long breath. My hands trembled, but my voice did not. I suspected for years. But the proof. I began collecting it after that night she told you I should be sent away. That was when I knew she wouldn't stop until I was gone. Daniel winced, his jaw tightening. His silence said everything his lips could not, that he had heard those words, too, but had been too afraid to confront them. Why didn't you tell me? He whispered. Tears stung my eyes, but I held them back. Because you weren't ready to see it, Daniel. You loved her. And love blinds us, even to the sharpest knives pressed against our backs. He dropped his gaze to the floor, his chest rising and falling with uneven breaths. I wanted to reach across the space between us, to gather him up like the little boy who once climbed into my lap with his stuffed bear, but I knew I couldn't. Not yet. He wasn't a child anymore. He was a man, broken, yes, but still a man who had to face the weight of his own choices. The days that followed blurred together. Detectives came and went, asking questions, collecting evidence. I provided them with everything: hard drives, recordings, bank statements carefully tucked away in a shoebox beneath my bed. Each file, each document, was a nail in the coffin of Angela's schemes. Neighbors whispered, of course. That was the way of small communities. Rumors moved faster than the wind. Some pitted Daniel. Others, though, weren't so kind. They wondered aloud how a man could be so blind, so easily deceived. But I defended him. Always. Because I knew what it meant to be blinded by love. I had been blinded once, too, by his father. A man who had smiled sweetly at me while hiding shadows in his heart. A man I had forgiven one too many times before death had freed me from his grasp. And maybe that was why I had recognized Angela for what she was. Because I had lived it once before. Daniel withdrew into himself. He avoided friends. He avoided neighbors. He barely spoke at all. But late at night, I would hear his footsteps pacing in his room, his muffled sobs bleeding through the walls. I ached for him. One evening, I found him in the kitchen, staring at a photo pinned to the refrigerator. It was from a summer barbecue. Angela on his arm, both of them smiling wide. His voice was hollow. I don't know who I was with all these years. I don't know if any of it was real. I stepped closer, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. You were real, Daniel. Your love was real. That's what made her lies so cruel. But don't let her poison make you doubt yourself. For a long time, he didn't move. And then, slowly, he leaned into me, resting his forehead against my shoulder the way he hadn't done since he was a boy. Mom, he whispered, voice breaking. I'm so sorry. For not seeing. For not listening. For letting her. I held him then, arms tight around his trembling body. You don't need to apologize. You've suffered enough. What matters now is what comes next. The words felt heavy even as I said them. Because the truth was, I didn't know what came next. Angela's trial loomed ahead. The recordings would speak for themselves. The fraud, the affairs, the whispered plans to send me away, they painted her into a corner she could never escape. But the scars she left behind? Those would take far longer to heal. And as much as I wanted to believe that justice was enough, I knew better. Justice punishes the guilty, yes, but it doesn't always comfort the broken. That, I realized, was my role now. To help Daniel find himself again. To remind him of the man he was before Angela dimmed his light. To remind him that love wasn't meant to shackle, it was meant to free. It would not be easy. But then again, nothing worth keeping ever is. The courthouse loomed ahead, tall and unforgiving, its cold stone walls reflecting the winter sun. I adjusted my coat, my hands trembling despite the gloves. Daniel walked beside me, his face pale but resolute. Angela was already inside, of course. I had caught a glimpse of her earlier, flawless makeup, designer dress, a performance-ready smile plastered across her face. She looked like a grieving wife, not a criminal standing trial. But masks don't last forever. Inside, the air buzzed with anticipation. Reporters lined the back rows. Neighbors whispered among themselves, hungry for drama. And in the front, the prosecution and defense sat poised like dueling predators, each waiting for the other to slip. When Angela entered, a hush fell. She walked gracefully, her chin lifted as if she were attending a gala rather than her own trial. She scanned the room, her eyes briefly landing on Daniel. She gave him a look, soft, pleading, almost innocent. My son looked away. That was the first victory of the day. The prosecution opened with the recordings. Angela's voice filled the courtroom, dripping with venom. It's time to send her away, Daniel. She's holding us back. That money should be ours. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Some shook their heads. Others whispered in disbelief. Angela sat stiffly, her jaw tight, but she forced a small laugh, as if to suggest it was all a joke, taken out of context. Her attorney pounced on that angle, of course. Ladies and gentlemen, haven't we all said things in the heat of the moment? Haven't we all spoken carelessly, words we didn't mean? But the prosecution wasn't finished. Next came the bank records, the forged signatures, the quiet transfers, the offshore account, and finally, the affairs, photos, messages, hotel receipts. Angela's perfect mask began to crack. She shifted in her seat, her polished smile flickering under the weight of evidence. When it was my turn to testify, I stood slowly, steadying my breath. Every eye in the room followed me as I made my way to the stand. The oath felt heavy on my lips, but my voice was clear. The prosecutor's questions were gentle at first. They asked about my suspicions, my decision to collect evidence, my role as a mother who only wanted to protect her son. And then it was the defense's turn. Angela's lawyer rose smoothly, his smile practiced. "Mrs. Collins," he began, "isn't it true you disliked Angela from the very beginning?" "I disliked her lies," I replied calmly. He tilted his head, feigning sympathy. "But you never approved of their marriage. Isn't this an attempt to remove her from your son's life, once and for all?" I leaned forward, locking eyes with him. If I wanted her gone, I could have walked away years ago. But I didn't. Because my son loved her. I stayed silent, even when I knew the truth, because I respected his choice. Until the day she decided my very existence was an inconvenience. The room grew still. Even the judge's gaze lingered on me. Angela shifted, glaring at me with a venomous glint. The lawyer tried again. "Mrs. Collins, these recordings, you admit you made them secretly, without consent?" "Yes." I let the word hang in the air. And thank God I did. Because without them, the woman sitting there, I gestured toward Angela, would still be smiling in my son's face while plotting his ruin behind his back. The silence that followed was deafening. For the first time, Angela's mask slipped entirely. Her lips curled, and she hissed across the courtroom. "You've always hated me. You wanted me to fail." The judge banged the gavel for order, but the damage was done. The jury had seen her true face. The trial lasted 2 weeks. Evidence stacked higher and higher. Angela's defense crumbled piece by piece until even her lawyer looked weary of the performance. When the verdict finally came, the room was silent, tense. Angela's face drained of color. She reached for Daniel, desperation in her eyes.
"Please."
"You have to believe me, it wasn't supposed to be like this." But Daniel didn't move. He didn't even look at her. Instead, he reached for my hand. And in that moment, as they led her away in handcuffs, I knew justice had been served. But justice doesn't end with a verdict. It only opens the door to healing. And for Daniel and me, that journey was only beginning. The house was quiet again, but not the hollow, painful silence Angela used to fill. This silence was softer, lighter. It was peace, fragile but real. Daniel moved back home for a while after the trial. At first we spoke little. He spent hours sitting in his old room, staring at the wall like the boy I once tucked into bed after nightmares. Only this time, I couldn't banish his monsters with a bedtime story. One evening, I found him in the living room, hunched forward, his face buried in his hands. His voice cracked when he spoke. "Mom, how did I let it get this far?" I sat beside him and placed my hand over his. "Because you loved her. Love makes us blind, Daniel. It makes us forgive too much, overlook too much. That doesn't make you weak. It makes you human." His shoulders shook. For the first time, my son cried not out of anger, but grief. And I held him, rocking him like I did when he was a boy, whispering, "You're safe now. She can't touch you anymore." The days blurred into weeks. We rebuilt routines. I cooked breakfast. He joined me for coffee. Sometimes he talked, sometimes he didn't. But he was present. And that was enough. Christmas approached again. Just the sight of the decorations in town twisted my stomach. Last year's holiday had been poisoned. Angela's voice seared into my memory. It's time to send her away. This year, Daniel surprised me. I came home one afternoon to find a small tree standing in the corner of the living room, crooked and imperfect, strung with mismatched ornaments. He looked sheepish. I thought maybe we could try again. Tears welled in my eyes. It's beautiful. On Christmas morning, we sat by that little tree with mugs of cocoa in hand. There were no expensive gifts, no lavish meals, no pretense. Just the two of us, sharing quiet laughter, trading stories about years long gone. At one point, Daniel turned to me. You saved me, Mom. Not just from her, but from myself. I don't know if I'll ever deserve it. I cupped his face gently, forcing him to meet my eyes. You're my son. You'll always deserve my love. Always. The fire crackled softly. Snow fell against the window, blanketing the world in white. For the first time in years, I felt warmth not from the flames, but from hope. Angela had tried to tear us apart, but in her failure, she gave us something we hadn't had in so long, each other. And as I sat there, watching the glow of the lights flicker across my son's face, I realized something. Revenge wasn't the victory. Justice wasn't even the victory. The real victory was reclaiming our peace. And this time, no one could take it from us. The house had fallen quiet after the chaos of Christmas morning.
No sirens. No shouting.
No fake smiles stretched across Angela's lips. Just silence, thick, heavy, almost foreign. I sat in my armchair, staring at the empty space where the tree stood. Daniel was in his room, pacing. I could hear his footsteps through the floorboards. He hadn't spoken much since the police left, and though relief should have flooded me, all I felt was a strange emptiness. That night, Daniel finally emerged. His face looked 10 years older in a single day, dark circles under his eyes, a pale stiffness around his mouth. He stood in the doorway, hesitating like a child about to confess. Mom, he whispered, his voice breaking. I didn't protect you. I let her treat you that way. I almost sent you away. I closed my eyes. For weeks, I had rehearsed this moment in my head, wondering what I would say if he ever realized the weight of his silence. Now, the words came naturally. You were blind, Daniel. Not cruel. Blind. He sat down on the sofa across from me, burying his face in his hands. She made me feel like nothing without her. Like I wasn't a man unless I followed her rules. God, Mom, I don't even know who I am without her voice in my head. I leaned forward, my hand trembling as I rested it on his arm. Then we'll find out together. Who you are. Who we are. Without her. The days that followed were slow, heavy with shadows of memory. Every corner of the house reminded Daniel of Angela, her perfume lingering in the hallway, her carefully chosen furniture now seeming sterile and cold. Once, I caught him staring at the Christmas decorations on the mantel, his eyes wet with tears. She picked these, he muttered, almost to himself. Even now, she's everywhere. I gently removed the garland, piece by piece. Then we'll make new memories. Decorations that don't carry her fingerprints. We'll start over. Daniel nodded, but his face still sagged with guilt. One evening, snow fell thick outside, blanketing the street in white silence. Daniel sat at the dining table, staring at a mug of untouched coffee. I joined him, placing 2 plates of stew on the table. Eat, I said softly. You haven't touched much in days. I don't deserve to sit here with you, he said, voice shaking. I let her try to throw you away, like you were nothing. And I almost believed her. What kind of son am I? My throat tightened. For a moment, I saw the little boy he once was, the boy who used to climb into my lap, bringing me wildflowers from the yard. I reached across the table and took his hand. The kind who lost his way. But you came back. That's all that matters. Later that week, we took down the Christmas tree together. Daniel lingered over each ornament, some bought when he was a child, some gifted over the years. When he held the silver angel, one his grandmother had given me decades ago, he broke. Tears streamed down his face as he whispered, I forgot what family really meant. I hugged him then, a long, tight embrace that neither of us wanted to end. Slowly, life began to stitch itself back together. Daniel offered to help around the house, fixing a broken cabinet door, shoveling the snow, even cooking with me in the evenings. At first, he fumbled with the simplest tasks, but his effort mattered more than perfection. It was like watching him relearn how to be himself. And one night, as we washed dishes side by side, he finally looked me in the eye and said, "I think I understand now. Love isn't about control or fear. It's about protection, about care. You always gave me that, Mom. And I forgot. I'll never forget again." I didn't need revenge anymore. I didn't need Angela's downfall to feel victorious. My victory was standing beside my son, seeing him smile again after so many years of being trapped in her shadow. My victory was reclaiming peace in my home, one quiet day at a time. And as winter melted into spring, I realized something else. Sometimes the greatest revenge isn't destruction. It's survival.